Despite the vast majority of my playtime taking place in mechanically intensive games, such as first-person shooters and grand strategies, I've always had quite a soft spot for point-and-click adventures such as Monkey Island, Grim Fandango, and even the Tex Murphy games. However, I don't tend to play these games for their puzzles. Obviously, I have some level of enjoyment from finally cracking some of the hard puzzles in these games, or else I wouldn't even give this genre the time of day. But I always tend to value the story and theming in these games far above anything else. Because of this, I've never really given the subgenre of point-and-clicks that are focused on puzzles a chance, as puzzles with only the loosest sense of narrative framing tend to bore me to tears. So I'd say in the end it's pretty lucky for Rusty Lake Hotel that I actually gave the game a chance, because despite what the Steam reviews might say, it's only a point-and-click in the loosest sense of the word. What really sets this game apart from a large amount of its brethren is the fact that it manages to work with a theme that makes the already surreal nature of puzzles for puzzle's sake feel like a natural fit in the world. The developer, oddly enough known as Rusty Lake, has chosen to frame this game in an extremely surreal setting, complete with anthropomorphic animals and an atmosphere inspired by Twin Peaks. The surreal tone manages to make these convoluted puzzles seem even more natural, while the extremely odd way that many of these puzzles are solved in turn, adds to the surreal nature. From the moment you boot up the game, you can really tell what kind of a ride you're in for, simply due to the nature of this insert coin screen. Once the game starts for real, one of 2 cutscenes in the entire game is shown, and it really establishes the calmly surreal nature of the experience that's about to unfold. The remainder of the game's plot, up until the ending, is told through this interesting take on first-person point-and-click. The little amount of dialogue that the player can get out of the NPCs is really all they have to go on for the majority of the game, and its vagueness manages to give the player enough information to keep them understanding what's going on, while still keeping them intrigued about what it is exactly they're doing. The aesthetics of this game are really quite nice, and to be absolutely honest, they're the reason I actually gave this game a look in the first place. Each art asset manages to cohesively exist with each other, and all appear to look quite nice. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, as I'm not the best at critiquing art, so just have a look at the footage in the background and see what you like. In terms of things I can describe, the music in this game is absolutely great. Created by Dutch composer, Rusty Lake Hotel's music manages to perfectly create the atmosphere that the developers were clearly trying to achieve. Has managed to use perfect timbre and instrumentation for all the scenes that are portrayed, as well as creating unique motifs for every area of the game. Overall, I'd say each track manages to create both a calm and eerie sound, which really sells the atmosphere. When it comes to actually playing the game, it controls somewhat similarly to old-school first-person point-and-clicks, where the player has to move about a number of predetermined perspectives in the room by either clicking on an area to approach it, or clicking on any of the arrows on the side of the screen to rotate or back away. Because this game was made in Flash of all things, the only method of interaction of the world is through the left click. You know what happens when you use the right click in Flash things? You know, this fun menu. While this limitation doesn't hamper gameplay that much, I did find a few instances where having the right click available would probably speed up a few things, such as being able to rotate a dial in the opposite direction instead of having to cycle all the way back around. Aside from this one issue, I found no real problem with the interface. Even the inventory is relatively painless to use, as there was rarely more than 6 items being held at one time, which minimalized any inventory clutter. However, the one-button interaction and large UI elements do scream of one thing: mobile port. Which, as it turns out, happens to be the case here. However, don't let that scare you away, as not only are the assets presented in high quality on the PC, but the game also feels perfectly natural to control using the mouse. There's no awkward interfaces or anything that you have to deal with, and it doesn't even tell you to touch things instead of click. It's great. In terms of the puzzles that are in the game, they all seem to be fairly intuitive, but that's not to say that some, if not all of their solutions, are completely nonsensical. Now don't get the wrong idea. These don't require the huge leaps in logic that other games in the genre are infamous for. It's simply that the rules that these puzzles follow are not the same as the rules in our world. Items can be taken out of paintings, and pulling on an antler on a stag skull can generate Tabasco sauce. The strangeness of these puzzle solutions often seems surreal, and because of this, the player is quickly able to understand that following traditional logic won't really get them very far. The other major puzzle solution that is present in Rusty Lake Hotel are puzzles that are based around maths logic. That's not to say the game wants you to fully grasp the practical applications of the pigeonhole principle, but instead, the game just wants you to be able to substitute symbols for numbers and discover their value. Or complete the ever-popular liquid volume puzzle that seems to be in every game. I found the puzzles to generally not be too hard, but I did actually have to take out the dreaded pen and paper every once in a while to solve a few of the tougher ones. The developers have also been quite considerate in allowing the player to actually access walkthroughs created by them on their website for those who are having a hard time. Now, I'm going to briefly touch on some spoilers here. I wouldn't say that it takes away from very much from the game, considering that a lot of the core revolves around this, but if you do want to remain in the dark as much as possible, just jump to the time that you see on the screen. The objective of the game is to prepare a dinner worth dying for every one of the 5 nights that the game spans across. The way this is done is a bit morbid, let's say. Remember how the guests in the game are anthropomorphic animals? Well, you got to get the meat from the dinner from somewhere, right? I'll let you put 2 and 2 together. But anyway, each night the player gets to choose which of the guest rooms to go to, and while they're there, they have to find the ingredients for any particular meal. While the player is required to find the meat for each meal to be able to progress, they can also take the option of looking for 2 other ingredients to increase the number of stars they get at the end of the night. What is it with phone games and stars anyway? Now for you playing at home, you may have noticed that a lot of what I've said has something to do with the surreal atmosphere of the game. Either that it makes the game feel surreal, or that the surreal feeling amplifies the element. This is really the case with most elements in this game. The atmosphere is spot on, and if any element was out of place, I'd say the whole thing would fall apart. If the game didn't feel so odd, the puzzles would be either boring or unintuitive, and the game would lose all it had going for it. The game is really worth playing just to see how the story unfolds and why you're doing what you're doing. The game ended on a to-be-continued screen after what seemed to me to be an odd ending sequence that raised more questions than it answered. Now, despite this, I feel Rusty Lake Hotel operates as a complete package and a standalone product. However, after playing the game, I decided to venture onto the Rusty Lake website and discovered that developers actually made a number of other games known as Cube Escape that supposedly tie into the same universe as Rusty Lake Hotel. Now, I don't really know anything about these games, but I can only speculate that the ending would make more sense, or at least be more meaningful, if I had actually played these other games. However, because that's not the case, the ending only adds to the surreal atmosphere of the game. However, Rusty Lake Hotel does have a few shortcomings. Of course, there are the aforementioned issues related to the game coming out on both PC and mobile, but there are a few other little annoyances I had. For instance, there's no way to know whether an object's interactable, other than simply by clicking on it. This could be alleviated by simply having the cursor change when something's mouse-overed, which would alleviate the large amount of random clicking I found myself doing when I got stuck on what to do. I also felt that the game could have had a few extra hotkeys, such as selecting inventory slots, but whatever, it's not a deal breaker. Again, both of these things do seem to tie back to the fact you can't mouse over things on a touchscreen, so maybe it slipped their mind when they were focusing on the Android and iOS port. Now, taking everything I've said into consideration, I strongly feel that Rusty Lake Hotel is worth giving a shot, but only if you're into one or all of the following things. 1. Point and clicks. 2. Puzzle games. Or 3. Surrealism. I managed to blast through this thing in a 1 2-hour setting, so it's not a particularly large investment, and I felt that the game went on for exactly the right amount of time. Any shorter, and I think the game would have been lacking something, but if it continued on for much longer, I would have felt it would have gotten stale. At the time of writing, it's only $1.70 US on Steam, which is considerably less than what society has decided is reasonable for a McDonald's chicken and cheeseburger, so I can guarantee that you'll get far more enjoyment out of Rusty Lake Hotel.